Hello, and welcome to Mutual Exchange Radio. This is Alex McHugh, and for today's episode, I sat down with C4SS writer and all-around organizer, Logan Marie. A Catholic anarchist without adjectives, Logan Marie discovered anarchism through the punk scene in high school and went on to join the Industrial Workers of the World in college, where she studied theater arts. She's a former editor, writer, and co-publisher of the queer anarchist news zine Pink and Black, co-founder of the Libertarian Anti-Fascist Committee and the Libertarian Socialist Caucus of the Libertarian Party. She is a member of the Libertarian Socialist Caucus of the DSA, co-founder of the anarchist Mardi Gras crew Krewe de Main, and their festival Coup de Gras. She's a current organizer with the IWW's Freelance Journalists Union, and she spends her free time performing comedy, cosplaying, and writing comics. After working with Logan for the past couple of years as a writer and heavily involved member of the C4SS crew, it's been fun to get to know her and learn more about agorism. So that's what we're mostly talking about today, although we get into all kinds of subjects. And with that, I want to thank you for joining us today, Logan. I'm really excited to have you on the show. And I think we're going to get into a lot of interesting questions. What are you looking forward to the most to talk about today?
Honestly, Mardi Gras, Agorism, the whole 9 yards. It's going to be fun.
Awesome. Yeah, so I thought we would start with agorism, in part because it's an ideology that I don't think many people are familiar with. A lot more people within our circles have probably heard of it or read a little bit about it. But I wanted to just start with the basics. What is agorism? What are the central values? And how does it fit with similar or adjacent ideologies like anarchism, illegalism, syndicalism, and all of those?
Yeah, so Agorism is, it's an anarchist praxis. It's anarchism put into praxis as far as actually providing a framework that utilizes a mix of syndicalist and illegalist and anarchist tactics that have been utilized since the beginning of the anarchist movement and even before, but utilizes them in combination with set goals of increasing the gray and black markets as a means to build dual power outside of the state and corporate system. And what I love about it is, even though it is an offshoot of Rothbardianism, and many would describe it as left Rothbardianism, including Samuel Konkin himself, the person who coined Agorism. But even though it comes out of Rothbardian and ANCAP circles, it is distinctly anti-capitalist and is kind of an attempt to reroute that thinking back towards and kind of reconcile it with the anti-capitalism of every other strain of anarchism that was prevalent that Konkin was interacting with. And so it's really interesting how it takes elements of free market anarchism, but points out that syndicalism is a huge part of it, that unions are a big part of the free market. It points out that that the market isn't just about monetary transactions. It can include the gift economy. It also includes various social movements which fight against the state and capitalism. And he said that anti-racism, feminism, queer rights, things like that, were pretty essential to agorism. And I think it just provides... It provides a framework that takes, in my opinion, the best of a lot of different anarchist traditions, the dual power tradition being a big one, but also, illegalism. Agorists really have always championed the gray and black market, so everything from sex work, drug dealing, gun running, things like that are the big ones that people like to focus on because they're the dark and scary ones. But it's also things like paying in cash under the table or, things like that are a little less scary. Things that your grandma does. Not everyone pays taxes on every bit of income that comes in. It's like, yeah, we sometimes just pay in cash and keep things off the books. And I think that agorism both has a way to outreach to the right while firmly framing itself in leftist ideals, although sadly the movement is... the right wing of that movement is pretty right now, and I'm not tied to any specific terms. Agorism's interesting. I've always been kind of a synthesis anarchist and anarchist without adjectives, and I feel like agorism just provides a framework that allows that type of framework to be reconciled with market anarchism and such, and I don't know. Honestly, as Derek Rose and others have said, you can even try and achieve communism through through agorist means, if you really wanted to. Anarcho-communism.
Nice. Yeah, and that's the the understanding I had, right, is that it's tied in with a lot of different things, and I appreciate you going through, a bunch of these different connections, and also talking about how, black and gray markets are not just gun running and, the big scary ones. It's, your grandma selling things for cash, or, these sort of small neighborhood bartering, those sorts of things. One of the things I'd like to dig into a little bit more, so you're talking about building dual power. Can we take a moment and just talk about what is dual power? What's the idea of building dual power? And yeah, what that means as an agorist, or two agorists maybe.
So I actually first really learned about dual power in depth when I joined the IWW. And, the industrial workers of the world, their whole framing as a union is they're trying to build a new world in the shell of the old. We can't just have a revolution and then build up shit as if a revolution is, one singular event. But you have to build these structures and lay the groundwork long before you can abolish the state or capitalism. You have to have these structures in place that can serve as replacement networks or, replacement institutions that can help do these things. And so with unionism, it's grassroots unions like the IWW and trying to form worker syndicates, things like that. With with food distribution, it's things like food not bombs, free grocery stores. There's, free stores are another good example. A lot of reuse stores. There's a lot of elements of dual power, but also it's community defense organizations. It's things like Coalition of Armed Labor, or the anti-fascist movement, or any of these things that provide an alternative to our current state capitalist functions. So instead of calling the police, use your cell 411 app and, connect with whatever group of people that you have put together, and that and trust in case of different emergencies, things like that. There's plenty of... punk was really a dual power movement to the mainstream music industry in many ways. When, you have the mainstream network of venues and artists and record companies and such like that are all booking, promoting, putting out albums, doing these tours, things like that. But then you had the punk movement and other DIY music movements that they're playing basements, bars, parking lots, wherever they can, and there's these networks where you just talk to other bookers, you talk to other venues, and you just learn. And it's all kind of word of mouth. And back before the internet, a lot of these bands, it was zines you would pick up, or compilation albums you would pick up, and then you would write a letter and and get something in the mail, and that's how you would keep track of this. And now with the internet, it's sadly, a lot of that DIY structure, as capitalism tends to do, kind of gets sucked into new corporate structures. So now you got everyone... Sure, in some ways, stuff like SoundCloud and YouTube really democratized a lot of these media, a lot of these sources of media, but you also had a whole dual power movement of underground musicians start just uploading to SoundCloud and promoting this big corporate platform into what it is today. And that's what that's not what you asked, but that's what capitalism still has a tendency to do, is just co-opt anything. But dual power, until we abolish capitalism, we have to be aware of capitalism's power to co-opt things and continue to build alternatives when they co-opt any ones that they have. And I think cryptocurrency right now is a great example. You see, not cryptocurrency as a whole, but you see specific cryptocurrencies or specific blockchain projects be really corporatized, and it's corporations trying to co-opt that. And you also see the way these state regulations crack down on so much and make it hard to participate in some of that economy without going through know your customer bullshit and verification. And so we gotta continue in the cryptocurrency circles to create alternatives. And it's not just a one and done deal. Dual power is constantly having to position itself as the things that it is trying to be an alternative to constantly shift. It has to reposition itself and shift it itself in order to be a successful dual power structure in that way. Long and rambly answer that went a lot of places.
No, I mean, I think it's good to get into that aspect of it, because it is something that has frustrated me, and I think is important to understand about building dual power, is that, yeah, it's going to be this constant process of trying to, outrun capitalism's co-option. And yeah, I mean, like you said, we see it in the crypto space, we see it in the music space, we even see it in activism and grassroots organizing, where people get sucked into political parties, get sucked into organizationalism in a way that makes it hard to keep doing things on your own. And this is kind of just an aside, but sort of on that note, does Cell 411 still exist?
It does. It's not as active. I mean, from what I heard, I don't really trust the person who made it, but what are other better alternatives, to be honest? Yeah, no, surprisingly, that does exist. That's one interesting thing about Agorism that I really think is that without a firm critique of capitalism, is you see some of the Agorist space falling in line with the corporate co-option of various so-called agorist tools. So, because of that vulgar libertarian ideal where they conflate the free market with actually existing capitalism, a lot of times corporations starting to utilize cryptocurrency and blockchain isn't viewed with the sort of skepticism it should be. And it's not to say that every project that a corporation gets its hands on in blockchain space or cryptocurrency space is automatically bad, but you do have to view it with a level of suspicion that comes with an anarchist critique of any power structure. And it seems to me that so many right-leaning agorists and ANCAPs within, agorist circles really just kind of aren't. They fall into vulgar libertarianism in such a way that they just get excited about corporate co-option of these technologies that could be agorist, but then end up slowly no longer being in many ways.
Yeah, no, I think crypto is a great example of that, and just the excitement of crypto going mainstream when I would agree, it's counter to any of the benefit that the blockchain offers. So with that, I guess, are there any more like specific agorist projects or movements or tools that you want to talk about before we dive deeper into the theory?
I mean, I'd say some of my favorites are, Cop Watch, is definitely an agorist project, more and less in creating an alternative to the cops, more, an alternative security force that watches out against the cops. Black Panthers really were praised as being an organization that practiced libertarianism and agorism, even if they never used those terms. I think in the same way, Common Ground Collective, having been someone who went through Katrina, I think that group is very important. And I think, the Cajun Navy and some of the other groups that have spawned up, my friends in Tampa who started mutual aid disaster relief, like all these alternative disaster relief organizations are huge as far as that goes. And I mean, domestic abuse shelters that don't report to the cops and things like that, and help provide aid directly to survivors, which is often ignored by the cops. Like, that's, I mean, even if they're getting state licensing and stuff, that's still agorist in many ways. And, you know, as I'm sure we'll touch on later, like, agorism isn't necessarily inherently black and gray markets, even as much as that's the main focus. But yeah, I mean, there's pretty much any anarchist project that you could think of can be labeled agorist in some way, because aside from, like, red market stuff, some illegalist stuff, and, you know, they're not into propaganda of the deed. That's about the only thing that agorism really seems to, like, the more violent versions of propaganda of the deed, like assassinations and stuff like that. That's really all it excludes is red market stuff. But even that, you have people who try and reconcile agorism and egoism and things like that actually allows for more illegalist practice than just the typical, like, just drug dealing and sex work that agorism focuses on. I mean, illegalism focused on, like, I mean, that's where you had all the anarchist bank robbers and stuff, which just isn't very practical nowadays, honestly. Regardless of what your morality on that is, you know, your moral views on that are.
Right. There's just not enough trains to hop onto.
Yeah.
Cool. So, yeah, taking a little turn towards the theory, there's a really great zine of your essays that's called 5 Essays on Agorism, and I'll put the link to this in the show notes. It's available on the left market zine library, so I'll put the link in the show notes. The essays, those 5 essays, are green market agorism, white market agorism, entrepreneurs and the lumpen proletariat comparing agorism and illegalism, agorism versus ethical consumerism, what's worth your money, and towards an agorist syndicalist alliance. So the first question I wanted to ask, having looked over these essays again before we hopped on, for our listeners, can you explain what green market agorism and white market agorism are, and, you know, how they're different from just the general thrust of agorism?
Yeah, so white market agorism is really something that I think most people would be more familiar with. As much as everybody likes to say that agorism is about gray and black markets and eschewing the white market, that's never been entirely true. Ever. Even if you look at just surface level of the agorist community, most of these cryptocurrency projects are completely above board and completely legal. You look at Defense Distributed. I mean, fuck Cody Wilson, but, you know, you look at the tactics that they did, they always stayed above board. All these big, huge examples that right libertarians like to pull of agorism, aside from, you know, the typical drug dealing, gun running, sex work type stuff, why is that always the trilogy of ones that get brought up? Not saying they're bad, but it's just kind of funny, the small, like, narrow focus.
It,
But
it certainly paints a picture, yeah.
yeah, so white market agorism, that's what Carl Hess did with alternative technologies. And environmental technologies. I mean, that's your farmers markets. Um, that's your community defense organizations that are operating within completely within the law. Um, that's your maker spaces, your hacker spaces, your community info shops, your your local, community center that caters towards activist shit, your local tool library, your local private radical library, like, or bookstore, like, any of those things, like and that's also every worker co-op. Like, that's an alternative to capitalism in a major way. And when you actually have worker democracy in that way, that's a form of agorism that's often ignored that is completely white market. And I mean, sure, you can go gray market with a collective too from there, and maybe stop paying taxes or utilize crypto more, or I mean, hard to stop paying taxes as a business, but I don't know, depends on what your business has. I mean, there's different things. But the thing is you don't have to go that hardcore. You can focus on things that are completely legal. I buy my food from local farmers. I shop locally as much as I can. Like, I really try and find local networks that I know and can engage in. I'm part of a, community gym. I try and stay involved with the makerspace over here. Like, I go to the farmers markets. I am part of the free grocery store project over here. Like, I helped Free Store keep going for the longest time. Like, have been involved in community self-defense projects, these type of things. That's all white market stuff. And then green market agorism is agorism's obsession with colored markets. I was doing research into all the colored markets and realized that despite their obsession with colored markets, I have never heard any agorists mention green markets within agorist theory. And the green market is the second-hand market, the reuse market. So that's all your thrift stores, your consignment shops, your fix-it shops, your flea markets, your reuse stores, your pawn shops, it's that whole network. It's of community swap meets and free cycling, like, networks, and even dumpster diving. It's really about the second-hand market in that way, which really jives well with ideas of the circular economy. And I think that the more we end up reusing things, the less we have to rely on current capitalist and state systems to produce new things for us. The less that we have to rely on them to produce, the more we're able to focus on the things that we still have to produce, finding alternatives for those things. And it also just has huge environmental benefits, not having all that type of stuff in landfills or in our oceans or wherever. And I mean, I really love the idea of Repurpose Project, which is our local reuse store here. And they're like a thrift store, but they accept everything that thrift stores don't. It's a junk store. They have, they're outside. It's a lot of salvaged wood. It's a lot of, you can find, they have a whole selection of doors, windows, glass panes, tiles, old nails, screws, all in various different states. Some of it's not that great. Some of it's pretty damn great. Inside, it's everything. You will find electronics, and in some of them working, some of them not, but the ones that are not are always labeled, and those can be scrapped for parts or fixed by, hobbyists. And they have their sewing section is, they'll take any random bits of cloth, no matter how small or, things like that. People will put them to use. And you will find just loose needles and different things like that they sell, and just individual pieces of sewing supplies that would normally come in kits, but that people just donate to them. And from their collections, you will find you will find one of my old roommates who was a teacher used to get individual colored pencils, crayons, markers, poster board, all kinds of random art supplies from there. They have random stuff, like you can donate bottle caps, and people use it for, like, art and stuff, like old lighters, pill bottles, shit that you really wouldn't think anywhere would take. And they just have a fish tank full of corks, and people put them to use. And you're encouraged to find creative uses for all of this. Their old location had, one of the things I love, they had old golf clubs as flagpoles that they were using. You will find just weird shit like that all the time. And I go there for random cosplay materials and all that. And I absolutely love it. But that's a perfect example of green markets. And they just expanded into not just Repurpose Project, but they started a second store called Reuse Planet that focuses on bigger pieces of furniture and appliances and things like that thrift stores also normally don't have the room to take. And so their ultimate idea is to eventually try and start a chain of big box reuse stores. Kind of like Big Lots, but all just secondhand stuff. And I don't know that they'll get to it, and they don't even care if they're the ones who do it. They just like the idea of that spreading. And it's really cool. I volunteer there a lot, so I think there's a lot of cool green market projects that people could get into, and I think that having a focus on expanding Agorism to focus on environmentalism as a core focus, and also to be more explicit that there are white market activities included that don't come with a ton of police risk, that, which every other anarchist community is really good at pointing out, that you could still do this shit without or risking arrest. And there's still ways to help. So I don't know. I think it does a lot to actually transform Agorism and make it a lot more accessible.
Yeah, I see what you're saying about, kind of having this natural fit with green movements anyway, and, making that more of a focus. I really do hope that your is it called Repurpose?
Repurpose Project.
Repurpose Project? Yeah, I hope they're successful in spreading that and getting more groups like that or more businesses like that started. Go ahead.
Oh, I was about to say too, Agorism has always had an environmental focus from its earliest days. Carl Hess was the environmental agorist as far as the early days of Agorism. And, I mean, when agorism was really first starting out, go read, if anybody hasn't, go read, what was it, Neighborhood Power and Community Technology. Those books are absolutely amazing and focus on a lot of environmentalist technology and alternative energy sources, self-sustainable, farming systems that, can be on a neighborhood level, things like rooftop farming and basement aquaponics and, all kinds of stuff. And he was focused on that from the beginning. And for some reason, it seems that it's been lost, and at best, you'll hear people, at best, sometimes you'll hear people tout, solar power, in a half-assed way in certain communities, or in certain agorist communities, or you'll hear excuses for how cryptocurrency doesn't take as much power as we think it does, which, true and not true, depending on what we're talking about. But it's, it seems that there's not really much of a focus beyond, conspiratorial, anti-GMO shit. You don't really see a focus on anything environmentalist, really, in the Agorist movement at large. And aside from, Derek Bros, he's always had an environmental focus, but he also is into some conspiratorial anti-global warming shit at the same time, so I don't understand
it. That is a weird mix. That is a very weird mix.
Yeah, he was at the anti-Dakota Access pipeline protests and stuff, and he was, been heavily involved in stuff like that, and he's, tries to stay in touch with his indigenous roots and finds environmental activism very important to him. But he also is into a lot of weird conspiracies, and I don't know, he doesn't think climate change is real, but he can see pollution. And so, and I mean, he's one of the only people that's ever convinced me that you don't have to believe climate change is real to actually care about the environment and care about pollution and other things. I still think it's a very uninformed position at best, but it is interesting how apparently you can be an environmentalist without believing in climate change, because he somehow does it. Weird. Sorry.
No, that's great. Thanks for going through those different forms of agorism and what you're trying to do by talking about green markets and white markets and all of that. The other terms that came up in these essays that I thought were interesting was this idea of vertical versus horizontal agorism. And so I'm wondering if you can go through a little bit what those terms mean within the agorist movement.
Yeah, I mean, vertical and horizontal agorism is kind of the difference that I've been talking about between gray and black market agorism and white market agorism. It's really, vertical agorism is about creating these systems that allow the agora to expand, that don't necessarily have to do with black and gray market ideals. So that's where you get, again, a lot of Konkin's work in trying to create self-sustaining neighborhoods. That's where you get cryptocurrency and a lot of those movements. That's where you get, I mean, really just the cryptography movement and a lot of the crypto-anarchist movement in general is a huge influence on agorism. And so much so that it's kind of consumed a lot of agorist circles today with still a very narrow focus, despite the fact that tech activism is a lot broader than Web3. And I don't know. So vertical is kind of, that's your farmers markets, that's your cryptocurrency, that's your self-defense groups, that's all your white market, and, gray market stuff too, because you do have, like, a lot of farmers markets you could buy under the table, things like that, or barter, other things like that, which that offers a space that's way more accessible, and that's something that anarchists tend to focus on anyways, whereas horizontal is really the traditional idea that people have of agorism, of the black and gray market, more illegalist style shit, that vertical agorism is supposed to kind of make space for, allowing it to exist. So, yeah, vertical is way more the white and gray market stuff that kind of builds the agora and allows it to exist and offer it protection and resources and things like that, whereas the horizontal agorism is focused on the actual legalist shit. So think of it, a good example is horizontal agorism is like black and gray market sex work stuff. But the vertical agorism that allows that to exist is the accountants who help sex workers figure out how to figure out their taxes, or the web hosting companies that host sex worker websites, or sites like Backpage and stuff that used to exist, and the sites that have replaced it since that I'm not going to draw attention to. And I think, like, those things are very important, and one cannot exist without the other. So, in some ways, I mean, me talking about white market agorism was me just rebranding vertical agorism in a way that pointed out that, hey, not everything you're doing, as much as you try and pretend, is black and gray market. Which also just makes it less scary for newbies to jump into.
Right. That makes sense, though. I hear what you're saying, that it's also about the sort of level at which you're functioning, right? And the vertical is building the things that allow for the space, and then the horizontal is those actual interactions within that space. That was a great example about sex work, right? That people actually doing sex work is horizontal, and the infrastructure that allows people to do that, right? The back page, the accountants. I love thinking about the accountants who work
that's
with
an
sex workers.
important part of it that people don't think of is you've got to figure out still how to file taxes and get your finances in order and figure out what you can pass off as for work and what you could say your work is. And that's hard to do. But there are accountants who specifically, and it's word of mouth. It's not something you can usually just Google. But it's these underground networks that that are word of mouth that you can consult other sex workers, get recommendations, things like that of which accountants or which, services will cater towards you. And it's the same thing of finding doctors that aren't judgmental. Or the blacklisting, like the blacklists that exist of different clients that get spread around through various ways. Like, these are all... And I mean, the blacklist gets a little more into gray market territory, but I mean, even that's really not anything illegal. Like, it gets into gray market territory because it's aiding an illegal action. You're really not going to get in trouble for making a list that's online or wherever else. Like, that is more the vertical side of things that helps the horizontal stuff stay safer.
Nice. So with that, I think we can get a little bit out of the theory zone now. I think we can turn to the fun part now, which is that I wanted to ask you about the Coup de Gras festival project specifically. So I had the honor of joining you last year down in Louisiana around Mardi Gras to...
Oh, wait, well, no, it was last. Yeah, no, it was this year. Yeah.
Yeah, this past February or March, right? I know how time works. I don't know how time works.
No.
But yeah, I really enjoyed that. Got a lot out of it. And so, yeah, I think we could start with just, can you tell us, how did Coup de Gras start? What is it? And like, what was the impetus for starting this project?
I'm Cajun and I love Mardi Gras. But no, it's
that end of interview. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, no, I mean that's really honestly was kind of it. But we had, for a minute, I was helping some friends clear out some space that we were going to turn into a homestead that was a commune that we were going to call Coup de Main, which is Cajun French for lend a hand. And we thought that was very appropriate. But that land ended up being shit land and floods a lot, and still trying to figure out what exactly to do there. But we kind of had a crew that formed around that, and we decided that, fuck it, let's form a Mardi Gras crew. And we decided to form an anarchist Mardi Gras crew. And the thing is most Mardi Gras crews act as different forms of community organizations. A lot of them act as benefit societies, in some form or another. And you will have members helping members, and year-round, you will have Mardi Gras crews raising money for different causes, doing different forms of community service and charity work. Like, there is a structure there that is part of the local community that we can very easily, as anarchists, take and utilize for anarchist purposes. So some of those crews act as benefit organizations. We try and turn this crew into a benefit organization at some point. Like, we're small and don't have many resources, so there's not much we can really do, but, like, we are trying to get back to the community by every year. We want to do some sort of community direct action or mutual aid project as part of our Coup de Gras festival. But, yeah, so Krewe de Main formed out of the Coup de Main land project. And then Krewe de Main decided to start a festival, since we do not have the money to deal with all the permits and insurance and everything, the thousands upon thousands of dollars that it takes to throw a parade. We decided that we would throw a festival instead. And a ball. And the festival the first year was actually at Coup de Main. And it was a camping festival. There were about 5 of us. And not even everyone camped. And we ended up inviting Vermin Supreme and running around New Orleans for Mardi Gras. And it was a lot of fun. And that was the first year. And then second year, things got a little sidetracked with the pandemic, so we went digital, and that really gave us a chance to expand. And that year we did 3 days of panels online on various different on various different YouTube channels and platforms. We were even streaming at one point on Vermin Supreme's channel and Re-Education, that YouTube channel as well. And we actually had Aaron from Re-Education host our ball that year on Mardi Gras Day, which had a ton of awesome performers. We had bands, we had burlesque dancers, we had comedians, and it was awesome. But our third year, we went back to in person, and that's when C4SS jumped on board officially. C4SS had been, we held our panel the second year online and things like that, but the third year we officially had C4SS come on as co-organizers of the festival along with Krewe de Main, and that really took things to the next level. We had a weekend where, we had the weekend to hang out and talk, and y'all got to get to know a little bit about Mardi Gras culture and attend some of the parades. And we were able to go flyer locally for our ball and really get the word out there. And then our ball, we managed to highlight a bunch of amazing artists, comedians, drag performers, bands, and I mean, we threw an amazing punk show that was a handful of folks there. That was their first. And we had a few kids show up who were underage, but we managed to accommodate them by opening one of the windows and letting them hang out in the parking or on the sidewalk up front. And Nathan Goodman and I even went outside and moshed with them, and it was fun. And it's just a chance to kind of combine the politics, the culture, and the art together. And so, I mean, you get kind of Cajun and Mardi Gras culture, you get the anarchist politics, and you get a lot of the DIY art scene all kind of thrown into one, and we try and make it a mix between an anarchist book fair and a Mardi Gras festival. And next year, Mardi Gras is, I believe, the 21st. And so we're going to be doing it the Thursday before, February 21st, and we're going to be doing it the Thursday before the Friday before we start, and then we go through that Wednesday, because Mardi Gras is on Tuesday, and then a day to just relax after, and for all the Catholics there to repent for their sins on Ash Wednesday. You know, all the sins you'll be committing at Mardi Gras the day before.
Right.
And it'll be a lot of fun. So we have next year, it'll be 3 days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, of anarchist book fair style shit out at Fontainebleau State Park in Mandeville, Louisiana. And there will be camping, and folks can we will have vending space available. People could table for organizations. People could sell their artwork, their wares, their zines, their writings, whatever. Their Agorism products. And we, it'll just be camping throughout the festival at Fontainebleau State Park. The first 3 days will be mostly there, focusing on an anarchist book festival. We'll have an unconference, which by unconference we mean that we're not creating a schedule in the way that most conferences do. In that we are not prescribing a schedule of events for y'all to come attend. We are soliciting a schedule of events from y'all. So we want it to be a conference, an unconference. We want it to be something that organically forms. That, if people have stuff they want to talk about and share, they can sign up for a free slot or for a time slot, that's free, and talk about it. And it's really as simple as that. And we're not responsible for what everybody might say during their talks, and there may be some disagreements. Hopefully nothing that crosses any lines that I think that we as anarchists would be too uncomfortable with. But, you take your chances with an unconference to a degree, but we'll also have all our fucking regulars who are part of C4SS and other organizations that we're friends with doing talks and things like that. So you will be able to come, and it will be a C4SS event where you can come see some of us come out and speak, and you can, come buy our books and interact with us and ask us all the weird nerdy questions that, you don't, that you can't type out into a tweet, but, don't want us in there and feel weird about sending us long random emails about. Come talk to us about that stuff. We'll nerd out about politics together. It'll be a lot of fun. And then we also get drunk and go to the parades. There's the Zulu Festival on Monday, which is a cultural festival that is free, that we, as a group, plan to attend because it teaches a lot about the first Main Street Black Mardi Gras crew. And it's very important for us to learn and acknowledge. And then our ball, if you're in a band, if you perform burlesque, comedy, drag, poetry, if you want to, if you want to do live painting or sculpting or anything weird, you want to do performance art, some circus acts, we don't care. Come, if you got an interesting piece of performance art that you want to share, contact us. We are definitely looking for artists to be part of our ball. And, we, are trying to highlight artists in general. Every year we get our gator mascot redesigned by various like small artists, and we try and promote all this stuff. And if we're successful this year, we had to cancel pre-fest. We had to cancel our pre-fest last year, sadly, but if everything goes as planned, and everything will not go as planned, but if everything goes enough to plan, we will have, and it's very likely, we will have a pre-fest, the 3 days before Coup de Gras. So that will actually be that Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday before Coup de Gras. We're actually going to have a traveling pre-fest that goes from Baton Rouge to Lafayette to New Orleans. And it'll, each of those 3 days. We have the first days in Baton Rouge, second days in Lafayette, third days in New Orleans. We have some amazing DIY spaces, venues that we're working with, and it's going to be a mix of comedy and music, and possibly some other performance art if anybody wants to jump on. So, if you want to come perform at Coup de Gras, but you're worried about maybe not having some other performances to be able to supplement things, come play pre-fest too. Contact us. Our website is Coup de Gras. That's COUPDEGRAS.WTF. So, yeah, Coup de Gras. What the fuck. And, check it out. Next year is, let's see, we had Coup de Gras, we had Coup de Gras 2, Electric Luau, Coup de Gras 3 was, what did we say was Coup de Gras 3?
Tammany Drift.
Yeah. And, because the county that Mandeville is in is St. Tammany. So, Tammany Drift. And, then we have, this next year is Coup de Gras 4, A New Hope. So, We will have some awesome Star Wars themed shit and be nerdy as fuck. Come check it out. We have flags that will be going for sale that I think y'all will like. And possibly some other merch. And if you can't make the entire festival, come out to our ball on Mardi Gras Day at Pelican Pub in Slidell, Louisiana. It's an old town Slidell. And yeah, so come, but if you can, come hang out with us in Mandeville and all that weekend at Fontainebleau State Park.
Nice. Yeah, I'm excited to get back down there. I had an absolute blast with this last one. And it was really cool. You know, I think doing it as a camping festival really gives us a great opportunity to do some Skillshare and some DIY stuff, you know, because we were able to be together and doing things like putting up tents together, building fires and cooking on them, and
building
even
a guillotine.
Yeah, building the set pieces for the ball. So it was great to get, you know, some DIY time in, and really feel reinvigorated in that way.
I do have to ask, you coming into Mardi Gras as a first timer, what was your expectations versus the reality?
Yeah, I guess it was somewhat what I expected, but I think the biggest thing was, you know, having been to a lot or a number of, you know, kind of like mainstream music festivals, I kind of expected it to be something like that, right? Polished and people, you know, a lot of polished and costing money and, you know, kind of just about partying. But I was surprised to see how much it is still a community event, and it's about the community coming together, and it wasn't expensive at all. And, you know, there's no polish, right? And you had kept saying leading up to it, Mardi Gras is really anarchist. It's really anarchist. And I was like, I don't know if that's true. I don't know what that means. But yeah, actually being there, I think that was, you know, that really came through. You know, it's about people putting things on their own, you know, and doing things as a community, and, you know, having this space to kind of interact, you know, with people that you normally wouldn't. And that was one of the really cool things to see, is just like every single person trying their damnedest to have a good time and get along. You know, that was really uplifting.
It's definitely wild, and the amount of, like, especially like the Slidell parades and stuff, you see a lot more rebel flags, and then you go in New Orleans and you all of a sudden it'd be like a lot more hip hop music being played and things like that, and you just have and also just New Orleans, the fact that all the cops are stuck out just doing traffic or leading parade or like marshaling parades or like leading them and escorting them and shit. Since they're all busy, they're not doing normal cop shit. And the police station is locked up during Mardi Gras weekend because every cop is on the streets. And it's wild when it's legal to drink. The only rules as far as open containers is no glass, and even that's just a $50 fine that's rarely, if ever, enforced. I mean, I've literally walked down the street with like 12-pack of glass bottles of beer and just drank through the entire 12-pack myself, so they really don't care. And now weed's decriminalized, so, I mean, when we were at the Zulu parade, I'm over there I mean, we're over there smoking weed and stuff and drinking, and there's families hanging out next to us. And I mean, at one point, the little girl in front of us caught me a Zulu coconut.
That was so
and
cute.
she's handed it to me. She's handed it to me as I've got the pipe in my hand, and her mom's like all, excited and stuff, and like, yeah, we've been catching many. You want it? We've been catching a ton of them. You want it? Like, nobody cares in that sense, as long as everybody's just having fun. And I think one of the things that y'all pointed out to me that I kind of just take for granted, too, is the way, and I forget whether it was you or Nathan, but the way that things are structured, it caters towards making it a safe place for people to just be intoxicated. And it not be as big of a deal. And I thought that that's interesting because, yeah, like, everybody's drinking out there and it's not a huge deal. Like, you're not running into a ton of problems like some people think you would. And also, there's a certain level in which the cops expect you to be kind of intoxicated and roll with it. There's a level of shit you're allowed to get away with because they allow public drinking and understand that you're going to be drunk. I mean, shit, there's a joke in Treme, the HBO show, which takes place in New Orleans shortly after Katrina, where, like, a cop, like, arrests or some guy for wandering out the bar so drunk that he had his pants around his ankles, and was just like, why, that his chief is just like, why did you bring him in? Like, just help him pull up his pants and send him on his way. It's New Orleans. Like, it's like, what the hell? I mean, shit, didn't your friend share a story with us about a guy dressed up in a Halloween costume that was nothing but a shoelace?
Yeah.
He was walking down the street, nothing but a shoelace, apparently, and I mean nothing from what she said. And everything's hanging out, and he's just wearing this shoelace, and she's like, so what are you? And he goes, I'm a shoe.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah, that was so cool to see. I mean, I'm definitely a very cop-phobic person, right? Anytime I see police, I'm not having a good time. And so I definitely, when we first got down there, there's a number of police out there because they're escorting the parade and whatever. It was at first a little bit like, oh no, like, do I need to be worried about this? And then I realized, just like you said, they're not watching us. They don't care what we're doing.
Blowing smoke in a cop's face at one point while smoking weed just to prove a point. Like, I mean, it's literally the thing that I said at one point that you definitely, like, had some culture shock over me saying was like, I'm sitting there with a drink in my hand at one point, just drunkenly talking about, like, how hype I get when I hear the sirens during Mardi Gras because I know the parade's coming.
Right.
And you're just like, wait, what? And I'm like, okay, but you got to realize, like, I have that association from long before I really developed my politics around cops and really had any experience directly with cops. But my first experiences with cops was shit like parades. And so there is a level in which, you hear that in that context, or like I hear that within that specific context, and I'm excited. And that's the only time I ever find myself getting like that. It's not like I hear a, siren out in the middle of the street any other time, and I'm like, ooh, parade. Like, I have to know a parade's coming. Like, to be excited like that. But when you're in that atmosphere, like I said, the cops are so distracted. I don't feel as cop phobic during those times because they're so distracted. I don't have to worry about it. I mean, shit. I've walked up to a cop, blunt in hand, drink in hand, and asked them for directions because I figured they definitely weren't a tourist and were someone that I could trust to give me directions.
Right.
You know, and it's weird to think like that, but that's Mardi Gras for you.
Yeah, and I guess it does make sense in that, Mardi Gras, like Carnival, like, any of these festivals, the whole idea, right, is to kind of flip things on their head. Authority figures are not in charge, and, you dress up differently than you would normally, and drag is a lot more accepted, and, all of these things is kind of built in to the festival itself.
And the point about drag being more accepted, that gave guys to a lot of gay and queer groups, being able to organize as Mardi Gras crews. And people being allowed to dress in drag or cross-dress or just present as themselves, in these ways. And that, I mean, shit, if you ever watch, there's this really good documentary called Sons of Tennessee Williams, which covers some of the early, gay carnival crews. And you have some of the guys in there talking about, my mom used to sew me and my siblings dresses every year for carnival, and that's the only time I ever got to wear stuff like that. And, and now I carry that on by being a drag queen, which she wouldn't be proud of, but, and it's just and it is that weird contradictory thing of oh, she wouldn't be proud of him dressing in drag, but she made him dresses growing up for carnival.
Right.
What?
Right. Yeah, it definitely felt like there was just a lot more open space than normal. I'm very excited too, really looking forward to it, and really looking forward to seeing who gets involved and who comes out.
Yeah, I think the lineup next year is Run the Jewels, Dorian Electra, Tom Morello. No, I'm kidding. None of these are playing.
We would love it if that happened. If you know those people or are those people, please get in touch with us.
Yes, if Tom Morello is listening to our podcast, please get in touch with us.
Oh, jeez. All right, so we've gone on pretty long here. I did have one more topic I wanted to get into a little bit, if you've got the time. That's gun control and gun rights. That is all good. So yeah, we just said we're excited about Coup de Gras next year, and I'll say, so I have one more topic that I did want to delve into a bit with you, which is gun control, gun rights, access to gun rights. And one of the reasons for this is that you had a really terrible experience now a couple of years ago, I think, with having some legal trouble after, being someone who carries a gun. So yeah, would you mind just sort of walking us through first, what happened and the case and kind of where that legal battle is now?
Yeah, so first off, licensing is complicated and expensive at times. And that is fucked up and makes things inaccessible. And when you're talking about self-defense, that's kind of a thing that needs to be more accessible. So anyways, I was I was attending a funeral of a friend who, ironically enough, was shot by the cops. And I say ironically enough because the reason why me and my friend got ran out of the funeral part, and chased down by a bulk of the funeral party and threatened multiple times was because I was wearing a Black Lives Matter mask to a funeral of a friend shot by a cop.
Mm.
Granted, he wasn't black, and he was... But, I don't know, I wasn't trying to make a point, it just was a mask that I had that I grabbed and put on because I needed a mask when I was walking out the door.
Right.
I don't know what to say, it wasn't some grand political gesture, it was just a mask. And I mean, I went to that funeral, and this was someone that I knew from high school who, I mean, he helped me when I ran away, and, made sure I was safe, very good dude. I saw him, country boy, thick accent. Saw him through his emo phase when he didn't ditch the accent. That was hilarious. And he went down... I mean, his family was much more conservative. He went down whatever kind of path since I stopped really hanging out with him as much. And he was part of the St. Augustine Patriots, which is, this right-wing pro-Trump group. And so his family was all part of that shit too. And, me and my friend go to the funeral, and they had a ton of Confederate flags over at the funeral, and oddly enough, it's always funny to see a ton of Gadsden flags as well, which I say funny enough because that became a symbol of the libertarian movement. Let's be real, Gadsden was also a slave trader, so whatever. It's a racist flag too. I say that as I got a rainbow Gadsden. Whatever, we're contradictory people.
Life is complicated.
Yeah, it's all about nuance and context a lot of times. But, what was I saying? Yeah, so, at this funeral, there's, a ton of Confederate and Gadsden flags, all this shit, and I'm not saying anything, whatever, it's a funeral, that's where they were at, I'm not trying to start shit. I'm not trying to talk politics at a funeral. I'm trying to honor my friend. So what if he went down a fucking path that wasn't the best? He still was a dude who helped me out in my life. And I hadn't talked to him in a long time to even know how far the right-wing rabbit hole he really went. So honestly, I don't know. I hope not that far. Talking to other friends, he really wasn't that far down, and it was more his family. But it was still, they chased us out. Originally, we were leaving anyways, oddly enough, and then we had, presumably his mother came up to us. I think it was his mom. I never met her before this, so I'm not actually sure. And, came up to us and was, asking me to take off my mask or leave, and I mentioned that we were leaving anyways, and, that I wasn't trying to start anything. And then she, grabbed me by my arm and started dragging me out of basically started dragging me out of the building. And then as she is, like, she gets out there and everybody's outside the front door, like, smoking and chatting and everything else because the funeral was over. And, everybody starts gawking at us and starts following her and us as we're leaving. And we start having them, they're starting to, like, talk some weird racist and transphobic conspiracy theory bullshit about how we're infiltrators for the BLM movement, how they're pretty sure Dustin was killed by the cops because he didn't support Black Lives Matter, which, what?
Wow.
I have no clue how that one works. So do they think cops are pro Black Lives Matter? In that case, why did they back the blue? See, none of this makes sense. Like, I don't, but yeah, no, they were spouting a bunch of transphobic nonsense and a bunch of racist nonsense and trying to say we're infiltrators and that we didn't really know my friend and this and that and the other, and my friend Felicia's there with me, and, like, we had just been talking to other people we knew at the fucking funeral party before this and, like, hugging people and everything else right before we left. But now we got everyone who didn't know us on our ass, which was the majority of the people there. We only knew, like, 2 people there from high school. But it was such a shit show. And when we finally got back to our truck, they wouldn't let us just leave. They kept asking us to leave, and then we're blocking in our truck.
Mm.
And then at the same time, we're trying to get in while they're fucking crowding us. And then they're telling us to leave and telling us that they'll put us in body bags if we don't. How am I supposed to interpret this if you're blocking me in and then telling me you're going to kill us if we don't leave?
Yeah.
And when we got to, 20 or so people, at least, like, worth of a funeral party, all crowded around our truck. Like, I'm not talking about a small amount of people. And several of them had their hands on their hips, and I know what that means as someone who carries.
Right.
Like, that was terrifying. And so I showed my pistol, which apparently I was not allowed to carry there, which, I don't know, weird bullshit. And we ended up they backed away and fucking let us out and everything else. And because I didn't have a phone at the time, I wasn't able to call the cops first and give them the story. So they ended up pulling us over about about a few miles down the road. And, after presumably someone at the funeral had called. And, then I ended up, dealing with the cops. That was wild, being pulled out by gunpoint and treated like that. But at the same time, they could have treated me a lot worse and do treat a lot of people a lot worse. I think that the fact that I'm white in that sense was kind of a blessing. As much as I hate to say that, because I don't know that, I don't know that everybody would have come out of that situation alive. They assumed I was armed, at the time, which the gun was in the glove box. But, they pulled me out, or, they didn't pull me out. They fucking stood behind their damn car, doors and shit, and they all had their weapons drawn and aimed at me. And they, called me out and had me, with my hands up, and then they approached me and shit, and, made sure that I didn't have anything, and then asked where the firearm was, and I told him it was in the glove box, and then, they pulled me and my friend separate, and normally it's one of those things where I don't talk to cops. I need a lawyer, and it was one of those things where I also needed to get home that night.
Yeah.
And so I told them the most bare bones version of the story without giving too many details. And the cop was like, yeah, that sounds fucked up. And, they gave me the gun back. Told me that at that point that I didn't, even though I had it unloaded, I was actually supposed to have the magazine, completely separated from the firearm. And so they separated it for me and stashed it back away in the car and gave it back to me and then let me go. And then put out a warrant for my arrest and started asking me to turn in the firearm. So it made no sense. But at the end of the day, I was in Gainesville. I didn't have the money for a lawyer at the time, so I just hung low for about half a year and worked my ass off. A lot of y'all wonderful listeners and you, Alex, and all our other wonderful coworkers and friends and comrades and shit, helped chip in and got me an expensive ass lawyer, which I still haven't even fully paid off, who managed to get me pretrial intervention, and it's just a year of supervision, which, I just have to have stable living and not, take drug tests and shit, which I have my weed license, so I can still smoke a ton of weed. And then I have community service, and some fines, which I still have to pay off. I gotta add up and figure out, but I've got a few $1,000s worth of fines that I gotta figure out still to pay off. And then I have, I'm almost done with my community service. I've been just doing it at repurposed projects once I already hang out there. So it's not been the worst. I think a lot of other people would be in a lot shittier situation than I. But there were many parts in that where I was like, okay, I'm gonna go back to jail. And might even wind up in prison. And thankfully, none of that happened. And I count myself very lucky. And I didn't even... Yeah, I count myself very lucky. I'm not allowed to own firearms for the duration of my supervision, but after my supervision, if I play my cards right, I can get this completely expunged. And then I'll have my gun rights back and everything. So it's a lot more hoops than you should have to jump through just to defend yourself. But all in all, I have to say I'm glad I live in Florida.
Yeah, that's part of the reason I wanted to talk about this, because I think the assumption, right, is that gun rights are for white supremacists and these people in Florida who are terrible and whatever. And I just think this story shows so well, like, no, access to firearms is for exactly the way that you used it, to prevent yourself and your friend from being harmed, right?
Now,
Like,
gun laws in most of their forms are usually used to uphold white supremacy and help, and usually lead towards, and our gun culture also usually leads towards white supremacists being disproportionately armed in many ways. That is definitely true. We also have just a huge white supremacist element of our gun culture. But yeah, and that's both pro-gun and, anti-gun laws. Like, the gun rights movement and the gun control movement both have super racist elements to it, and the laws enacted in their name get carried out in super racist ways, as every law in our fucking books does. And yeah, so, but at the end of the day, it's, when you look at our modern gun rights movement, it was really groups like the Black Panthers that that launched our modern guns rights movement and showed why it's so important. And I think, Pink Pistols, after the Pulse shooting, Pink Pistols over in Orlando responded by hosting, for a number of months after, we're hosting regular concealed carry classes for free.
Nice.
For queer folks to go and arm themselves, because those courses can get expensive. They, didn't have any sort of sponsorship to help people pay for the licensing from there, unfortunately, but they did at least have free classes to go take that really help cut down the cost for people to get armed. And those classes were filled. I took people there multiple times for when we had a Pink Pistols chapter in Gainesville, and it was filled, and that was contrary to the popular narrative of people trying to enact gun control measures in the name of the victims that died in that massacre. Like, it just seems like there's always that side of the story being overshadowed. You did have a lot of stories about how more black people were arming themselves during Trump's presidency and things like that. But that's really the closest you really see to that story being presented in the mainstream. And even then, it's framed in mainstream media in the same vague ways of, like, oh, white people arming themselves because Obama is president, which is just like some vague fear. Where it's like, the reason black people were arming themselves under the Trump administration was because of an uptick in racist violence. It wasn't because Trump was president and they were scared of, government coming after them or some bullshit. They were scared of, actual fascists coming after them. Sometimes with a fucking badge, sadly.
Right. Yeah, and that's actually something I got involved with a little bit here in Philly. Is we we had a lot of informal groups start up to help Black people start to, take these classes, pay for these classes, pay for licensing, get range days in. And yeah, I completely agree that that's so important and is in response to a real legitimate need, rather than the sort of paranoia that drives the white supremacist gun culture. But one of the things I think your story also illustrates well is that, even aside from what the laws themselves say, we know that the enforcement is variable, right? We know that when the police initially stopped you, they decided this wasn't a problem and let you go. And then something else happened that changed their mind on that. And that to me seems to clearly have nothing to do with the laws on the books, right? Like either it's one situation.
White cops saw two white faces and heard sympathetic stories and let them go.
Right.
I mean, I don't know that that's the only thing or even a conscious element of it, but it's definitely an element of it.
Yeah. So yeah, sort of on this topic, there have been a whole bunch of school and other mass shootings recently. And you were just saying in response to the Pulse massacre, bunch of gun control laws were passed or considered. There's currently new legislation that is supposed to pass the Senate soon. It is expected to pass. And one of the things that it does is expand red flag laws. And so I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about those specifically, because they're being billed as the most common sense, the most reasonable gun control step. But I'm curious, what you think about those laws and how they actually impact this.
Well, you got to think of what they're flagging for, first off. I mean, most are flagging for felony crimes, specifically for violent felonies. So that ends up being things like armed robbery, assault, things like that. So that's people who, I mean, that ends up being people who are caught up in economic crimes, who are, caught up in gang culture for whatever reason as well. But also, like, it comes down to affecting people who end up getting in a fight and getting charged, or who end up defending themselves in a certain situation that gets framed, to the court as something they get charged for. Like, I've definitely known people who have defended themselves and lost their rights for it, or gotten charged for it, and you end up having a lot of these crimes be enforced disproportionately in marginalized communities. Whether they are committed more in marginalized communities or not, which statistically speaking, most crimes are not. You do find economic crimes being more linked to poverty in general. But, and I grew up knowing, I grew up around criminals. I'm not saying that, like, as something that's, I grew up poor. That's what I'm saying. Like, one of my stepdad's, best friends from work regularly was in prison for armed robbery. What did that actually mean? It meant he got desperate every once in a while and go stick up a gas station and wouldn't try and harm anyone and never did. You know, like, I get it. It's not ideal. You're putting terror into someone, and that should never be the way you make your money, if possible. But, like, people get desperate, and I didn't think that meant that he shouldn't defend himself. I never thought he was a violent person. But even just low-level offenses that can get gun rights taken away, that just build up. You get in certain states with 3 strike laws, things like that, you can lose everything over nothing if it happens enough times. And so it ends up being that the most marginalized people end up losing their rights, and about the only common sense red flag law that seems to have any merit whatsoever is the domestic abuse, flagging for domestic abuse charges. And sure, like, statistically speaking, domestic abuse and gun violence does go hand in hand. And that is concerning. The concerning part is who is enforcing a lot of those laws. Like, yes, you can say it's liberals like to say it's the gun store owners that, are the one, but why are the gun store owners doing it? Because the police are going to, be on them if they don't. At the end of the day, it's always the police, and 40% of police, as the meme goes, and I mean, that's very true. That's a real statistic of 40% of police are domestic abusers. So, even domestic abuse red flag laws, you're asking an institution that is 40% made up of domestic abusers, or made up of 40% domestic abusers to enforce laws against domestic abusers in any sort of way that is fair and just. It seems like a lot's going to slip through the cracks there, or be enforced disproportionately, or just, even so, why are we entrusting domestic abusers with this task to begin with? It seems that if we're really worried about that type of thing, we need to start with disarming cops, and then figure out from there how we want to deal with the rest of the people in our communities that really probably shouldn't be armed. And there are people like that. But we can't trust the cops to do that. They have never had a good track record in disarming the quote-unquote right people.
Yeah, I think the part that's absolutely wild about that 40% figure is that's self-reported. That's cops who said on a survey, yes, I've abused people. So probably higher. And yeah, I totally agree. The place to start with any of this is to disarm the people who are being the most violent, which is the police.
Disarm cops, get JROTC programs out of schools. If you want to have like shooting programs and shit in schools where like people, where like kids learn to shoot, like that is something that, especially in more rural schools has been a thing. And like, I don't necessarily mind that under the right circumstances, but don't make it a military thing. Don't make gun shit tied to that. And I think if you can get those type of programs out, stop marketing that towards kids, and really refocus things on self-defense and just defund the fucking NRA and their bullshit propaganda. I think. And it sucks too, the militia movement is one of the biggest enemies of the gun rights movement.
Interesting. I mean, what do you mean there?
Oh, I just mean it's toxic as shit and has so much fascist entryism and ends up being a lot of the white supremacists that we end up trying to being the very people who you don't want to have guns. It ends up building up a toxic gun culture. Not to say I know very many people who are involved in various militias who are pretty cool people, but just that level of entryism that's there ends up building up that toxic gun culture. Also, there's a lot of militias who it seems more like LARPing for them than anything real. And that's where you get a lot of the tactic cool kind of people who just collect gear because it's cool and collect guns because it's cool, but they don't really actually sit there and train beyond a superficial level. And that's where you get these, people going out to protest dressed in their militia gear and shooting themselves in the foot.
Yep.
Which, I mean, has admittedly happened with people who identify as leftists, too, but whether the, Not Fucking Around coalition is truly leftist or not, I have no clue.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of my favorite terms that popped up for the kind of tactical people was the gravy seals, if you've heard that one.
Oh, no, I have never heard that.
Yeah. I don't know if that's just regional, but that's one that I heard and really appreciated.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we definitely have a lot of work to do culturally around how we treat firearms and how we treat gun culture, because it's quite toxic.
I think Scott Crow really said it best, is we really have to think about, and I mean, I'm very loosely paraphrasing his ideals here, but or his ideas here, but he talks about how a gun is just one of many tools in our tool belt and not the thing to build shit around. Like, in that way. Like, the way that right-wing gun culture seems to build everything around the guns, instead of just looking at the guns as one of many tools for a wider mission. That, I mean, a perfect example is just hanging out with a lot of the leftist gun clubs and going to different trainings, especially medical trainings and stuff. And these professional trainers, consistently, we have gotten compliments on how fast everyone is actually learning it and how much people are paying attention. Because we're not just there to LARP. We're actually there to learn real practical first aid skills and things like that, beyond just learning how to pew and look cool. And you see it time and again where people will know how to fucking put a hole in something, but not know how to patch it up. And that does not a healthy gun culture make.
Yeah. This if you're involved with gun culture at all, or with anything like that, definitely find your local Stop the Bleed session and learn how to do the other side of it. That is so important.
I have never had to fire my gun in self-defense. The closest I ever got was having to show my gun at that funeral. But I have had to patch some shit up. That is way more practical. I could have lost my pinky if I didn't know basic first aid. And yet I saved it without even having to go to an emergency room. That's what you
amazing.
It's worth it. Go learn first aid, go learn all that. If you really want to get into, like, a lot of the more practical shit in gun culture, or like, or actually wider like prepper culture. It's stuff like get your meds together, learn first aid, learn things like comms, learn different self-defense techniques beyond just firearms, and learn firearms on top of that. Don't look at that as your only tool. Stop looking at that as your only tool. And really make sure that if you're training with firearms, you have that as part of a wider training. There's a reason why the Panthers trained in martial arts as well as guns.
Nice. Yeah, so this might be a good place to end, a good note to end on, sending everyone off. Is there anything else that you want to talk about before we go, or make sure you mention? I will put the link to your ongoing fundraiser for legal fees in the show notes as well. So folks, if you're able to help out with that, there's still quite a bit of lawyer to pay off. But yeah, is there anything you want to end with before we sign off?
Sorry I haven't been writing as much. I've been focusing on other writing projects that are coming down the line that are still political, but more fictional. Currently working on a comic book, so keep y'all's eyes peeled.
Nice. I will look out for that, and thank you very much for joining me on Mutual Exchange Radio.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening, everyone. This was a fun episode to record, and we're very thankful to all of our listeners and supporters, especially those who throw a little money our way on Patreon. This support allows us to keep our equipment up to date, keep our audio editors paid, and helps us expand our podcast and other audio offerings. You can support us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/c4ss.org. That's C4SSDOTORG. Keep an eye out for some new bonus material there soon. And finally, here's a special shout out for our associate producer level patrons. Big thanks to David Colborn, ASDF, Brady P, Jesse Posner, and Acneron.